Joy Owango from TCC Africa. So Joy is an experienced award-winning and founding director with a demonstrated history of supporting early career researchers. So she's skilled in management, business strategy, research metrics, and in matters relating to research capacity, higher education, research analytics, donor and government relations. And she's been really doing amazing work in promoting open access publishing and open science as a whole in Africa. So we are really excited and pleased to have you join us and make a presentation with your team. So welcome, Joy.
All right. Thank you, Kibet. Thanks for the kind introduction. I'm going to take you through what we do as a center, that is the Training Center in Communication, in supporting researchers, research institutes, and governments in the education and the creation of awareness of open access. We are based at the University of Nairobi, Chiromo campus, that's on Riverside Drive, formerly called the College of Biological and Physical Sciences. It's now the Faculty of Science, Technology, and Engineering. And we've been in existence for the last 15 years. And of those 15 years, we've been training scholarly and science communication, and open science and open access falls under scholarly communication, because by the time you tell a researcher to produce good quality research, produce good quality publication, it comes down to access to literature resources beyond other factors. So if this researcher has limited access to literature resources, they end up using what is there, but not necessarily what is relevant. So that is why open access is so important. And open science is also extremely important for us it's really important. And that is why we are really pushing for it in the research capacity initiatives that we're doing. And one thing we've noted is that when you're looking at open science, you can't do this in a silo. It's not a my turn kind of situation to handle. It is a we. We need to do this together. It means either working with library consortia, it means working with government institutions. So in this case, research councils, research councils, granting councils, university commissions, because at the end of the day, they will be demanding the good quality research output. So it's not something that you can work in silos. So we actively seek partnerships with various higher education stakeholders so that we can support their various academic communities on how they can improve their research visibility and their output through open science. Now, as I said, we've been doing this for the last 15 years. And before we start looking at open access as being a buzzword, because right now everybody is looking at it as a buzzword, it's the next big thing after the SDGs, we need to look at it from a point of necessity. We need open access, especially for those of us in the global south. And I keep on reiterating, you cannot work alone in this process. And that is why we actively seek partnerships so that we can support the various academic communities in increasing their research output and increasing their visibility when it comes to open access. Because when you look at open access, what I see is opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to be visible. It's an opportunity for us to produce good quality research, but it's certainly not an opportunity for us to start fighting and bickering and saying, oh, we can only handle open science or open access in one particular sector. This is the one time where researchers in the global south can have the opportunity, and I'm being redundant, can have this opportunity to be able to increase their visibility and output through access to resources. And this is really important for us because when you're looking at international or any form of collaboration, it is the quality of research output that is seen as a defining factor. And when you go back to the ground, you realize that some of the reasons why we do not have good quality research, one of the reasons is because we have limited access to resources, literature resources. So more about why this is important to us, because there's a digital disruption in the higher education sector. If you look in the last 10 years, there's been a huge digital disruption because there's a rise in demand for open access, with open access seeking to return scholarly publishing to its original purpose and spread knowledge and allow it to be freely accessible. So basically, we are looking at breaking down on paywalls. When you're looking at data collection and analysis, we are looking at using open science solutions like the R software. When you're looking at research discovery solutions, you're looking at not using the paywall options, but using open access research, open science research discovery citation analytical tools like Dimensions or the Lens. These are all open science research discovery solutions. If you're looking at open access now, in the open access bit, you're looking at breaking down the paywall so that you can have access to journals that you can publish in and also read. Okay, at either very nominal prices or free of charge. So this is giving us a leveling plane. And that is why, as a center, we've been working very actively with various higher education stakeholders in building research capacity in the creation and education and awareness of open science and open access. Understanding what it involves, sometimes there are costs involved, understanding how to manage those costs smartly, and also being realistic on what it entails and what benefits it will have for we researchers. So in 2018, one of the major defining factors for open access was the launch of Plan S, which is supported by Coalition S, and it's an international consortium of research funders, and they demanded that by 2021, this year, publications that are funded by government institutions, so basically research funded by public grants, must be published in compliant open access journals or platforms. So basically what they are saying is, this is taxpayers' money. We need to see this work. We need to see this data. This is why we're also having this symposium, so that you can learn how you can use some of the various open science solutions so that it can be available. Some of this data can be easily available. Also, this is why this symposium is important, because you can understand why in the academic publishing industry right now, everybody is going the open access route, because it's to the benefit of the researcher. Now, Plan S started in 2018, and something interesting happened in Africa between 2018 to date. All 54 countries between 2018 to date have produced 499,864 publications. And of this, 51.3% is open access. As you can see, we are adopting open access. We are actively adopting open access because of the benefits that comes with the visibility of our research output. So we are actively, as African researchers, adopting open access publications. Now, let's narrow down to Kenya. How is Kenya performing? Between 1850 2021, Kenya has produced over 58,006 publications, and this is from the open access research discovery citation database called Dimensions, which Kenya has access to, and through the activities we've been doing with the Kenya Library Information Services Consortia and the National Research Fund, have been actively training universities on how to use it and how to access it so that they can support their respective academic communities. So gone are the days when you'll have to pay to have access to data like this, which can help in your research discovery, where you can get granting information, data sets, patents, clinical trials, and publications, and you're getting good quality publications. And this database as well comes with journals that are already indexed, so it also helps in mitigating predatory publishing. So what we can see here is data going back to 1850 on Kenya, and then Kenya's open access output. We can see out of the 58,000, 28,592 publications are open access. So yes, you can see we're almost going to 50% of our research output being open access. In the last 10 years, there's been a steady increase in open access. And as you can see, when you're looking at and you can see by 2020, that was last year, there was a huge, there's a huge surge in open access, which really doesn't come as a surprise, because thanks to COVID-19, everybody was demanding to have research accessible. So any kind of output that was produced related to COVID-19 or anything connecting to COVID-19 was open access. And these were one of the top publications that came out of Kenya. So it doesn't come as a surprise that the bulk of our publications in 2020 jumped up to, surged. The bulk of our publications surged, became open access in the year 2020. But overall, you can see there's a steady growth of open access publications. Which are the top 20 open access journals Kenyans are publishing in? As you can see, we're already publishing in open access journals, okay? And we're actively contributing to this. So PLOS ONE is the leading journal that we publish in, going all the way to the International Journal of Infectious Diseases. So you can notice some of the Kenyan journals, like the East African Medical Journal, and then there's the Pan-African Medical Journal. These are all Kenyan journals, and these are all open access. So these are the top 20 journals that we are publishing that are open access. So you can get top 100, top 200 if you so wish, if you're using this platform called Dimensions. But this is extremely important for you to understand, because the trends are heading towards open access, and you see Kenyan researchers are also moving in the direction of open access as well. So the numbers you're seeing in the side on the right hand side are the publications that have come out of that have been produced by Kenyan authors, these open access journals. So this is just detailed data. I'll share the screen with you, which also shows the names of the researchers and also the funding, the funding institutions that have provided grants to the researchers who've published in this open access journal. Now, as I began earlier on, we are a 15-year-old organization. We are an award-winning organization. We have supported over 9,700 researchers, trained over 80 institutes, worked in over 40 countries, and we have a community membership, rather a mentorship program of over 900 researchers from 2 continents, and they are actively trained on all aspects of scholarly and science communication, and open science is a huge factor in this. And because of that, we are seeing a steady increase of members of our community graduating, publishing, and also adopting open science practices in their daily research career, careers. So as a center, we train, support, and empower researchers in Sub-Saharan Africa. And how we've been doing this is through institutional capacity strengthening, whereby we educate and facilitate and create partnerships in the research life cycle of the higher education sector. So basically, as I said, you can't work alone when it comes to open science. You need to look at ways in which you can work with the various higher education stakeholders. So we work with the granting councils, the research councils, the library consortia, and the university commissions, because if you look at it critically, the libraries are the gatekeepers of knowledge. So they are the ones who determine what comes in terms of knowledge in journals and research discovery solutions into the university or into your research institution. If your library consortia doesn't have the financial capacity to afford good quality publications or research discovery solutions, the academic community suffers. This is why open science is so important, because the library consortia are adopting open access and open science practices so that they are able to provide good quality literature resources to the university or the academic community. The University Commission demands good quality outputs before you graduate, so good quality publications. And that is why we work closely with them to make sure that whatever activities we are doing with the universities, they are kept abreast and they are able to support where they can in making sure that we are able to use good open science and open access practices that will help in producing good quality publications coming out of the universities. The granting councils is a no-brainer. They are the ones that fund research in the country. So in Kenya, we have the National Research Fund. We have about 15 granting councils in Africa. And these granting councils have been created in countries that have actually committed 1% of their GDP in higher education and research. So they've created an organization just purely for funding research. And for them, they want a return on investment. We are giving you funding for research. We want to see you publish in good quality journals. We want to see that work visible. And that is why we work closely with them. Between March and June this year, we were working with the National Research Fund, and we literally traveled in 4 different counties in this country, training researchers on open science and open access. So we were in Kisumu, we were in Mombasa, and we were in Rift Valley as well. So they brought together all the academic communities in those respective regions, and we were training them on open science and open access. The research councils is the same thing. They are the regulators of research in the country, and it goes without saying that they have a vested interest in good quality research coming out of the country. So open science is definitely a support system in making sure that research, good quality research is produced by researchers coming out of the respective research institutes that report to them. The center, in summary, this is how we support institutions. So when you're looking at open science, so we are looking at journal selection strategies. So we guide organizations on how they can produce good quality journals using journal publishing and practicing standards, best journal publishing and practicing standards. We help in maximizing research excellence and maximizing research through improving quality, quantity, and visibility of the impact of institutional research. And this is purely through research capacity building and mostly access to open science and open access solutions that can aid in improving the quality of the research institutions. So you need to visualize this from an from a multidisciplinary perspective. We are not skewed to one research area. We cover all research areas because the underlying issue at the end of the day is research literature resources which are needed by all research areas. And then we support institutions on how they can best practice in research excellence to increase their rankings, what they need to do to improve the quality of their outputs. And then at the end of the day, this is helping strengthen knowledge economies. This is why we work very closely with governments in creating that awareness, making them understand the importance of research discovery solutions and open access solutions that can help in understanding the trends in research, then benchmarking the performance of their research output against other countries or maybe with possible collaborators. So the open access and the adoption of open science falls under education and awareness, which we are doing right now, actively, including taking part in this conference, and also supporting libraries in upgrading their systems, especially in the adoption of the FAIR principles. Now, the library has changed. It's no longer a place where they'll give you books, but it's become a digital workspace. And for it to be a digital workspace, it means that everything in that library needs to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reproducible. Okay, if you have a library where information doesn't meet the FAIR principles, it is a silo, it is stuck in a silo. So we are guiding libraries on how they can adopt the FAIR principles so that they are able to increase their visibility, the visibility of their output. Now, when you critically look at how we work, we are a case of resource mobilization dependency theory, whereby we work with various partners in meeting our objective of making sure that we mitigate the external pressure of limited literature resources. So we are in the middle and we get in global partners, international global partners, and then with the global partners, we create collaborations with our partners in the global south in the higher education sector, such that we are able to be very systematic and strategic on how we support the various countries we work in adoption of open access and open science. Some of the success stories, so just this year alone, with our global partner from Dimensions, we've been able to provide national access to Dimensions in 6 countries. And we have the following countries on standby. So we are pretty much booked out up to December, and we have about 4 countries on awaiting confirmation. So that will be in the first quarter of next year. So what happens is that we've worked with the library consortia in the respective countries or the research councils or the granting councils, and they bring together these academic communities where we share with them this new research discovery solution, and then we start training their universities. We start actively training their universities. And what we're seeing is that there's an increased usage of these open science solutions. And this, as I keep on saying, this is not a competition. Open science is such a necessity to the point that even as a center, we can't come on our own to just provide this support. We have to work with stakeholders on the ground too, to make sure that it is effectively accessible and used by the various academic community. So far, we have trained between January now and October this month. We've trained over 50 institutions, and we've trained in over 10 countries. So this is it's a training that is always going on, and we're always supporting institutions that need access to this research discovery solution. So for context, and the other bit is the peer-to-peer learning on open access agreement. So these are still aspects of open access agreement. What we did is that we partnered with the global initiative of the Open Access 2020, which is based in the Max Planck Institute, and the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, which is a library consortia based in Canada. And what we did is that we started training library consortia on open access agreements. What does it entail? You know, and we worked with 4 library consortia in the first and second quarter of this year. And the success story about this is that some of these library consortia want to build up on that training and awareness so that we can have a much more active engagement with them for their respective academic communities. So when you look at our success stories, it comes with working with partners. So on awareness, on open access transformative agreements, we've been working with OA 2020, that is Open Access 2020 in the Max Planck Institute and the Canadian Research Knowledge Network in Canada. When you're looking on the increased awareness of preprints, we've been working closely with Africa Archive. So preprints, Africa Archive is Africa's only preprint repository and publishing platform. When you're looking at the increased awareness and use of open access research discovery, we've been working closely with Dimensions. If you're looking at the increased awareness of open access and publishing, we've been working closely with PLOS. If you critically look at this whole spectrum, what I've shared with you, it is the entire research life cycle of a researcher. So it's from research discovery to publishing, and we've managed to cover every aspect of that for a researcher, such that they know where they can get their literature resources when they're doing their research discovery. They know, they can understand how to negotiate on open access agreements, which is extremely important, because if you're not careful, you find yourself in a situation like in some countries in the global north where researchers are paying up to $9,000 to publish in a journal. So we are trying to avoid that. So also training researchers and library consortia is important. And then there is publishing, open access publishing. So we've taken we've gone through the entire research life cycle with strategic global partners in making sure that the academic community in Sub-Saharan Africa has a better understanding on open access and open science. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation, and really highlights the amazing work that you and your team are doing, and we really are pleased and honored to have you present to us on that. So I think at this time we'll have another presentation on open science as well by Kennedy Mwangi, and I was trying to have a look at this aspect, whether we can just have a discussion on open science, the joint discussion after Kennedy makes her presentation, if that works for you, Joy. Wonderful.
That's okay. That's okay.
Wonderful. Please, for the participants, please share your questions. If you have questions, you can put them on the RMD document also. That's on line number 63. There's a space there for you to capture questions. Someone is already taking notes. We'll just repost the link for those who just joined in. You can capture your name from line number 33 just provide your name and your Twitter handle, and that will allow us to just engage with you and tag you as well. So please do that. So at this point, I would like to welcome Kennedy Mwangi, who's been working really closely with OpenScienceKE, and we recently published a paper on open science in Kenya. Where are we? And just want to be able to match this conversation, the presentation that Jo has made, and of the work that they are doing and the various initiatives that they are undertaking to promote open science and open access within Africa. And also there is a online number on line number 24. There is a pre-symposium survey that you'd like to welcome you also to please take, and this will allow us just to gauge as it continues what's the level of understanding when it comes to open science, and then we'll be able to gauge also at the end of the series of presentations where we will be, and it will allow us to determine the value and the engagement with this training. So at this juncture, I'd like to welcome Kennedy Mwangi to make the presentation.
Thank you, Caleb, for the introduction. So I hope you can all see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so one of the aspects of open science is that all the participants in the science have to be aware of the tools and in order to be able to collaborate. And that means that you can't be an efficient scientist when you and your collaborators are not aware and equipped with open science tools. So this was an observation made by Caleb Tibet as he tried to use or collaborate using open science tools that he had learned and was now trying as a bioinformatician to collaborate with other bioinformaticians. So there is that you cannot be able to collaborate with others if you don't, or if they don't know this, how to use a tool that you yourself know how to use. So some of these tools may be in bioinformatics. For some of us who are be aware of them are like Jupyter Notebooks or Git and GitHub. So if you are not aware of that, then collaboration becomes a difficult thing. So this is when now he came up with a model, sensitize, train, hack, and collaborate. So this model is created the groundwork for the OpenScienceKE community. So the first step that we undertook as a community was to sensitize people using seminars so that they are aware of open science, what it is and what it entails and how you can do it. So then followed the training them or training the members or those who want to participate in open science using in workshops. So they are trained on tools that are used in open science. Then followed the hackathons where they learn to use those tools to perform some task, maybe in their field of research. Although in this case now we use the open science and try to understand how people are practicing open science, then collaborate, maybe in the writing phase or writing the research outputs. And finally, you have to keep the conversation going. Could be on using some other platforms such as Twitter and Slack, and even holding more workshops and hackathons so that you recruit other members into the open science community. So the first thing that we did in 2018 was to hold some seminar. This was in universities, and we started at Jomo Kenyatta University, where we sensitized the participants there on what open science is and the benefits of open science. And tools, just maybe sensitizing them on tools that are used in open science. So this was at the Kenya Bioinformatics Network, and that's when OpenScienceKE was born. So the next thing was to train on open science tools, and this involved some of the participants who participated in the seminars. So here we held a workshop at University of Nairobi back in 2018, shortly after the seminars, and this was meant to train the participants on Git and GitHub, R Markdown, and Jupyter Notebooks. So these are some of the tools that researchers in bioinformatics use to collaborate with other researchers, or maybe try to, if in bioinformatics you write a lot of code, or you have a lot of research output, a presentation of results. So then how do you share that with other researchers? Then followed the hack phase. Here we held a hackathon to practice some of those, also practice some of those tools that we used in the, we trained on. So here we held a hackathon at Jomo Kenyatta Memorial Library at University of Nairobi, and here it's where we now trained, or maybe try to answer some of the questions in open science using some of the tools that we learned, specifically Git and GitHub. That's why we collaborated using those documents, Markdown and R Markdown. And in the next phase, you see that we, as part of the OpenScienceKE community, collaborated and answered some of questions. I think we'll see what we are working on in teams during that hackathon. So this GitHub repository for the GitHub page for the OpenScienceKE, and you can just see some of the repositories that we have. So these members were sensitized on how to use GitHub. They were trained, and then followed the practical phase where we created some of the repositories and collaborated using this tool. So in the end, we published a paper on open science in Kenya, trying to find how, or the understanding of open science among Kenyan researchers in universities and research institutions. So this was a collaborative effort among the OpenScienceKE members or collaborators. So in our hackathon, we assessed the status of open science in Kenya. And the first thing that we did as teams, we had 3 teams. There was a literature and web searches to understand the status of open science in Kenya. There was also a data mining team that was looking at some of the, maybe trying to mine some data from PubMed and understand some of the trend of open access publishing. And finally, we asked where can researchers publish at low cost? So another team was looking at into that and trying to understand why or where can we recommend students or other researchers, early career researchers, to publish their work so that it is published in an open access manner and it's visible. So in our literature and web searches, we try to focus on institutions, specifically the universities and research institutions where researchers are, maybe new researchers are being newly minted, so to say. So in the first thing that we looked for institutions was whether they had institutional repositories where they could, or people could put their work or research output. Then we also looked at whether they have any policies on open science. And then do they conduct open science events or maybe sensitize people on open science? And also whether they have open educational resources. So for the data mining, we just look at the PubMed and try to download some of the papers from Kenyan researchers and try to find whether are they publishing more open access or are they closed? And also, we also looked at preprints and trying to understand whether they are being adopted by Kenyan researchers. So the first thing that we found was that there is growing resources to support open science, and these include among them ICT infrastructure. So in Kenya, we have a national research education network such as KENET. So KENET is one of the institutions, or it offers ICT infrastructure that connects universities. And if you consider some of the aspects of open science, such as open data, this would be really helpful because researchers from one institution can share data with another researcher from another institution. They could also offer facilities to host maybe research materials out there. So you see them, they facilitate the libraries to put their materials online. So we also looked at open educational resources and found that they are being researchers in universities are aware, even students are aware of open educational resources. And these are the OERs are teaching, learning and research materials that are put out there in, they have an open license. And so anybody can access them at any time and edit and maybe reuse in any way that they like. So researchers need to, or even students in universities need to have those materials so that they can popularize open science. So the institutional repositories are also available for some of the institutions. We found that places like ISIPE, they have some a repository or where they put their publications. And universities also have institutional repositories where they publish, they put their research by students, published work and also thesis. So these are very important as they make materials available, research output materials available for other researchers to interact with them. So we also found an increased open access publishing, and this is for Kenyan researchers. So we see an increased trend of published papers on PubMed between 1980 and 2019. So there is a significant rise over the years. And once we try to understand whether these papers were closed or open access, we found that there was a shift toward open access. So meaning that Kenyan researchers are adopting open access publishing style in publishing their work. So this is, I think, it coincides with what Joy said about researchers in Africa adopting, trying to publish their work in open access manner. We also find that they're compared to other countries out there, the global north. So Africa was lagging behind in publishing using preprints to publish their work, but there is a change in that trend. This was based on bioRxiv preprints data for 2018. So we found that in 2020, some of the countries such as South Africa and Ethiopia had already begun using preprints. And I think this is a good trend. And for South Africa and Ethiopia, we found that some of the journals, such as PLOS ONE, had encouraged them to researchers in those countries to publish their work open access. So there was that drive. So maybe more journals or more publishers need to reach out to researchers as they publish their work. They can deposit their work in preprints. So for us, we also deposited our work in Africa Archive, which is for African researchers. So before we even submitted our work to the journal to publish, our work was already online. So this enabled us to get people to read it even before we could complete the publication process, because it could be long, because you have a back and forth with the reviewers, which could take months. But this was a bit fast, and you just give them your paper, and then it is online. It is available online for other researchers to read and make comments. So where can we publish at low cost? So we created a resource on GitHub, which is a table that consists of publishers, and where you could, if you could look at this, you have a publisher in some of the journals that the publisher offers for publishing of research work. And we are looking at the scope in bioinformatics and computational biology, basically the computational sciences, and then trying to find do they offer waivers for researchers in low-income countries, lower middle-income countries, and what is the mode of the eligibility and amount of waiver may be offered, because you find that most of these publishers, they consider publications from researchers or early career researchers, and even other researchers who are from lower income countries, and offer waivers. Maybe it could be 50%, or even the whole cost could be waived if the researcher is not able to pay the publishing cost. So then we also try to find out the challenges facing open science in Kenya, and found that there are no policies, or there is lack of policies and incentives from the government itself. So we could not find any policies that the government, where the government is encouraging people or researchers to publish their work in an open access manner, maybe deposit their data. So there are not clear policies on that. And that same case for the local funders, the National Research Foundation. So we could not find clear guidelines on that. And if they are not available, then even the researcher does not know where to put maybe how to handle their research outputs in a manner that facilitates open science. Same case for the research institutions. And we also find that there is limited training on open science. So there is that lack of awareness among researchers, or among students and researchers in universities and research institutions. So I would like to acknowledge the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, who funded the activities of open science, the workshop, the seminars, and the hackathons that made us generate this work, and Kenneth also for providing the facilities for us to meet and perform maybe do the workshop and the hackathon, and also all the open science collaborators who are available for that collaboration. Thank you.
Thank you, Kennedy, for that presentation. Really where we are within the country when it comes to open science and providing a summary of that publication on OpenScienceKE and Open Science in Kenya. So I think right now we'll just have the questions from the audience, and then we can continue from there. So we have Jo Havemann as well joining us from African Archive, and I think she would really be a great resource when it comes to this discussion, especially on some of the initiatives that they are taking to promote the visibility of African research, because really sometimes when you look at it, it may not really be the fact that there's not much output coming from Africa, but rather the problem of visibility of African research. And so African Archive is doing that in promoting the visibility of African research and just ensuring that the adoption of some of these practices that one, increase the output, increase the visibility of African research. So welcome, Jo. So are there questions? Jo, if you would like, you can just give us a short statement, 2 or 3 minutes, and then you can join the discussion together with Joy and Kennedy on Open Science in Africa and Kenya.
Sure, thank you very much. Yeah, so as Caleb introduced us and myself, so I'm Jo Havemann, co-founder of African Archive. We've been on the in operation since 2018, so more than 3 years now. And yeah, basically here to promote African research output through providing platforms and digital repositories for African scholars to submit their work to free of charge, and basically in complementary to journal publishing in form of preprints and data archiving. And we do that with established digital repositories, namely Figshare, Science Open, Zenodo, PubHub, Chaos, Open Science Framework. Yeah, so basically here the opportunity is to share preprint manuscripts. So that's the author's last version to submit to a journal, to submit to our partner repositories free of charge, as you also submit to a journal. And that's highly complementary, and most journals also appreciate that move. So it's not contradictory as some people assume. You can also archive your data sets with us, and also presentations like slide decks and other output formats. Yeah, and we're also closely collaborating with TCC Africa. You've already heard from Owango, and we're very much keen on supporting you in your work. And yeah, any other questions? I'm happy to maybe also show a few more slides to get a better idea later on in the meeting. Thank you, Colin.
Hi, my apologies. It's like I lost my internet access. So, so thank you, Jo. I may have missed a little bit of your introduction, but I do understand a little bit about the amazing work that you and your team are doing. And so I think I'm going to just start with Joy and we've been talking about open science, yourself and the work that you're doing in promoting open science with multi-institutional collaborations. What really is open science, Jo, and what does it mean for Africa and African researchers?
Thank you. Other than the obvious definition that already exists in open science, I look at it as a form of opportunity for us as African researchers. It's an opportunity for us to have our research much more visible. It's an opportunity for us to produce better quality research. It's an opportunity also for governments to have data, easy access to data that they can use to benchmark the performance of the research coming out of the country and understand the trends in research that they can invest in. And of course, the obvious definition is the umbrella body of scholarly communication and scholarly outputs, which makes research available and accessible, particularly if this research is funded by taxpayers' money. But also the reality is, when I look at open science, we cannot blindly look at it without the business side of it, because under open science we have open access where the publishers are coming in, and it was really nice seeing Kennedy's presentation of the list of publishers who have waivers for researchers from the global south. That in itself is a sign that there's a business component to open science. So we should not go blindly to open science and say, hey, it's free. We need to look at it from an equitable perspective. Do we all have access to resources? And when you're talking about resources, we're looking at literature resources, resources for data analytics, resources for research discovery. Are we able to compete, to collaborate with researchers in the global north because we have the same type of resources, not relying on them giving us resources? And also, for me, as I said, at the end of the day, it's all about opportunity. We should not look at the definition, the theoretical definition of what open science is, but we need to look at the practical aspect of what open science does for us. What is it? What does it mean to us? And when you look at it that way, you look at it from the business side, you'll see how you're benefiting from it. You will also see you'll see how you're benefiting from it and how you can grasp at the opportunities that arise to help increase your research output, increase your visibility. If you're looking at this continent with the diversity of language, how we can make our local research done in local language accessible and visible as well. So that to me is open science.
Beautifully answered. Thank you so much. Kennedy, and I think you've talked about that, and you talked about some of the barriers to open, especially publishing open access. So Kennedy, what does it mean for an MSc student, a PhD student? What does open science mean for them, and what does it have to offer them?
Thank you. So I believe open science is important, especially for this the upcoming researchers, such in the MS, who are MSc students or PhD students and are just beginning to publish their work. So one important aspect of it is if they publish their work in an open access journal, so their research is not behind paywalls. So it is more visible. And we have also seen that there are journals that offer waivers, and these waivers can be used maybe to subsidize the cost of their research. So it is not very expensive to publish. And if there are also other outputs in their research work, such as maybe code, they have ways of showcasing that, and it's part of their scholarly work. So they can put it on GitHub and maybe even collaborate with other people who are doing similar research. So it makes their work more visible.
Wonderful. And I think I like the aspect that open science really goes beyond the publication in itself and the scholarly contribution. And someone gave the quotation that actually the paper is just the advertisement. It's the final work. They're just advertising all the other work that you've done. You've generated the data, you've generated code, you've generated techniques, and all those are your scholarly contributions. And if you can be able to take advantage of all the platforms that allow you to build your portfolio by showcasing the data you're generating, open data, the code you're generating, open source, and some of the software you're generating, that really is a benefit to the researcher. And I think I'll also just, Joy talked about being able to increase visibility of African research. And one aspect is being able to publish also in local languages. So Jo, within African Archive, I think some of the initiatives that you are undertaking would be speaking to that. Can you speak a little bit to that aspect of just being able to increase visibility of African research and what some of the initiatives that you're undertaking to promote that?
Yeah, I'm very happy to. Thank you so much. Well, a little bit overexposed, too much light. So with Africa Archive, since our launch, we encourage researchers to submit also in their local languages, meaning Swahili, Zulu, Xhosa, or Xhosa, Amerinds, whichever. It's not that it's happening so much, but some countries are actually quite good in publishing in the regional language and the traditional African languages as well, mostly in South Africa, also Afrikaans, and Tanzania publishes quite a bit in Kiswahili. In Uganda, you have quite a corpus of publishing in Luganda, and a few more examples. I'm sure there's also people here in the audience who can bring up more examples. But generally speaking, there is, of course, there's a need for lingua franca, to have like a common language for Africa that would be more than just English. We also have French research outputs to quite a high percentage, and Arabic, and then Portuguese for some of the countries. So, but research communication works in multiple ways and not only unilateral. So therefore, it's important for science literacy, but also for being able as a researcher to express the knowledge gained through your research in your own mother tongue, in your local language. Because to my experience, I have a training in biology, and many of the regional ecological concepts and also species that you find in plants and animals have a very high relevance, or regional relevance, obviously, which cannot easily be translated and transformed into other world regions or languages. And some concepts also in philosophy and other humanities subjects cannot easily be translated into English, and also English has, and especially technical English, is limited in its expression form. So therefore, yes, it's important to have common languages for us to be able to communicate on a global scale as researchers, and especially to combat the global challenges like climate change, migration, the virus that's going around, you name it. At the same time, we are fostering at Africa Archive, or we're basically trying to bring that to life, a sense of multilingualism, which is also postulated by the Helsinki Initiative, and I'll share the link in the chat in a few minutes, meaning that as long as whichever language you decide to publish in, make sure to also provide a short summary of translation into your own language, your mother tongue, or the regional languages, and especially the languages where the research is conducted, to give it a local context also in a linguistic sense. And that's only when it becomes impactful and applicable for further utilization of the knowledge gained, in our view. And that also serves the it also serves the attempts for decolonization of research and science in general, because we want to give African scholars a sense of ownership of their own data, and that can also be achieved through expressing the knowledge gained in your own languages. So yeah, that's what we want to achieve. And also to the previous statements, just to mention that open science is a huge term, and a few sub themes were already mentioned. Most often it's referred to open access, or it's kind of used as a synonym to open access, but open science also entails open data, as was mentioned, open peer review, open hardware, open source hardware and software, like which equipment you use in your laboratory, and if that's adaptable to a local context, also to the equipment that you otherwise have in your research environment. And this, as Joy also mentioned, is allowing us to leapfrog and to have affordable research equipment in the first place, but also to interact and engage with researchers around the globe, and to adopt their research equipment, and also other, like to develop a research ecosystem locally and regionally that's interconnected on a global scale. And this is what open science, the open science movement is trying to achieve, as you probably, well, it's the running theme of this event. Just wanted to highlight that again. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's quite insightful, and I think really sometimes talk about speaking like the second language. Sometimes people like really can express themselves in a local language, and if you actually want to make science accessible, as you say, sometimes you want to make it accessible to the communities that helped you, that you gather data from, and being able to present some information to them in their local dialects would really increase that accessibility to research output. So thank you so much for that. Joy, you spoke about the Plan S, and really that's been driven a whole lot in Europe, and there's a whole lot of work that is going on in Europe with regards to promoting open science, and it's really a big thing in Europe, especially. Even they are building also capacity in the same. There's a European Open Science Cloud. I'm curious about the work, or how our governments and in Africa as a whole are contributing to promoting open science. What are they doing?
Okay, and this in part will answer Kennedy's concern about policies. All right, so what is happening is that narrow down to East Africa. East Africa is, as a regional bloc, is actively involved in adopting open access and open science policies. And the interesting thing is that they are not creating a policy in itself, but they are creating, the policy is embedded within either an existing policy, like in the case of East Africa, which falls under the East African Commission, falls under the ST&I policy, and under it there's a huge component on open science. So that's how open science is going to come in, and then it will be replicated into the respective 6 member countries. Ethiopia is the only country that has created an open access policy on its own from scratch up. And then if you're looking at the Indian Ocean Islands, their open access policies are coming through their open learning policies. So they are looking at open learning from K-12 to higher education. So they're looking at how open science can be adopted in all those aspects. So when you're looking at the Eastern African perspective, the governments are adopting it through existing policies that they have, except for, I can comfortably say, except for Ethiopia, that created their own open access policy. But one of these deliberate decisions is because they see how open science is intertwined in the entire education sector. As I say, it's not something you can do on a standalone basis. So the adoption of open science, especially at a policy level, is coming in through existing policies that are supporting the higher education and research sector or the education sector. So that is what we are seeing in East Africa, Eastern Africa and the Indian Ocean Islands. And to a degree, I see that is really smart, because as I mentioned, you can't just do this in a silo. You can't say, I applaud what Ethiopia has done, but when you critically look at it, open access and open science cuts across the research and higher education sector, or the education sector. So it cannot be left in a silo. But then beyond that, there is the increased awareness and education that is being done by these by countries in the Eastern African region. There's an increased awareness because they understand the importance of open science, and also the reality that comes with the expense related to literature resources, whether it is for data analytics, research discovery, or even journal selection strategy. It's really expensive. So governments in Eastern Africa and higher education stakeholders in Eastern Africa are actively getting involved in the education and awareness of open science and open access. Thanks, Caleb.
Thank you so much. I think that really enlightens us on some of those initiatives, and we're really looking forward to seeing even that growing even further, and even in addition to just having the policies out there, being able to ensuring that one, the institutions are aware, the students are aware, all the stakeholders are actually aware of what policies are available and how it affects how they would conduct research, how it affects how they would really push their data out. And you can see things like the Personal Data Protection Act coming up, and that really has an impact on how we conduct research to some level, and even especially the policies or the policies that would come after that would really have a strong influence. And how can scientists also just ensure that they are part of the conversation to ensure that the policies that come up are actually really taking care of their interests. So thank you really for really enlightening us on that. Kennedy,
I have a comment.
Yes,
this is in regard to Ivna's comment. She's questioning why I'm criticizing Ethiopia's open access policy. No, I'm not criticizing it, Ivna, just to be very clear. I'm saying, unlike other countries in East Africa, Ethiopia is the only country that has created a national open science policy on its own. The ones in other countries in Eastern Africa, including the Indian Ocean Islands, they've included it in existing policies. So in East Africa, through the East African Commission, it falls under the STI policy. So open access is a huge component in that. In the Indian Ocean Islands, like Mauritius, it's they have an open education, open learning policy, and it covers K-12 to the tertiary education sector. So they're looking at ways to incorporate open science and open access with existing policies that are supporting the higher education or research sector. So that's what I'm saying. Ethiopia is unique because they created just one policy, an open access policy, without including it in other sectors. But then, of course, it has an effect on the higher education and research sectors as well. I hope yes, I'm glad I've clarified. Kibet?
Thank you for that clarification, and really, for lots of resources that you've been sharing also on the chat. So thank you for that. So I was just going to Kennedy, and you talked about the lack of policies and so forth when we were undertaking that research. And can you, so if you look at those lack of policies, what from what Joya said, what do you see as the shift, like the quick shift towards now increased open access policies within various countries, and what really seems to be driving that?
Yeah, so one of the driving factors that I would say that I would say is making these policies be adopted is an increase in we are in the age of data. And if you are coming from people are forcing the governments to maybe say how their data is will be used, and this is translating to policies, and people are also popularizing open science. So it is an aspect of open science is open data. So the conversation is starting to come up regularly among researchers and even other stakeholders in either the governments or the research institutions. So I think that's one of the driving factors.
Oh, thank you for that. Jo, what kind of policies, or more or less, if you just still within that conversation, African Archive is actually more or less plugged into what's going on within Africa, some of the policies that are there and some of the demands. So what kind of policies are available that are actually supporting the work that you're doing, or how some of these policies, are they a barrier or are they promoting publishing using even preprints? Especially if you look at some universities would be like, no, if you've already published in preprints, that's already, you cannot publish in some journals. That becomes a bit of a barrier. And so what are some of these policies that are there that are either a barrier or actually promoting preprints?
Yeah, from my experience, also from my work here in Europe, several institutions come up with their own policies, and these policies and how they are phrased depend very much on the experience of the people in charge. And we are in the middle of a transitional shift, like Joy expressed also, with the move towards transformative agreements and like intermediate states until open access or gold open access, diamond open access, whatever. It's a confusing landscape. So also for experts like us who are here presenting. So yes, some might appear counterproductive, but I try and not see it so much as such, and rather our job to inform the stakeholders of what the best approaches entail towards open access and towards equity in research on a global scale, and especially for African scholars in our case. So Joy pointed out in the chat earlier, we've come up with our own open access policy as African Archive, as also other institutions and organizations have. And that is based on several existing open access policies. And policies are, to my experience, also nothing that's enshrined in stone, but they keep evolving as also stakeholders communicate with each other, and the ecosystem evolves over time. So we all gain more and more experiences and learn how to utilize best practices and experiences gained along the way. Let me just maybe, or yeah, we share so the open access policies or the policy for African open scholarly communication that we've come up is also based on the work that Libsyns has done a year or two earlier. And we just tried to come up with one that is covering our own vision and mission and building on existing policies. Also, of course, crediting and acknowledging these to build a strong ecosystem, and also to collaborate with the stakeholders in the ecosystem for the benefit of the researchers, which we are all aiming to serve at the end of the day, and also to improve the system for everybody's benefit. And success in African scholarship is not only beneficial for African scholars, but also for humanity as a whole, if you want to put it so. Yeah, it sounds a bit pathetic, but everybody wins if individuals are successful, because African scholars have a lot of knowledge to share, and a lot of regional and local insights, and regional on a continental level. And as we know, like Africa is a huge continent, much bigger as compared to Europe and other places. So we have there's a lot of gain on a global scale for the success, through the success of African scholars for everybody else in the system. And we're here this is also the essence of science and research, to serve humanity now that we are a globally connected population.
Yeah.
And and science in Africa should also first and foremost serve African scholars and populations on the continent, as diverse as they are. And this is what we try and facilitate. And many of the other stakeholders as well.
Thank you. That's really quite insightful. So, because really when every component succeeds, and then we all get to succeed, and science from all stakeholders being actually brought on board. So, Joy, you have your hand raised. Please go on.
Yes, it's just to reiterate what Jo has said. We need to acknowledge that academic publishing is evolving. So we've always lived with the traditional perception of what academic publishing is, and open access is part of that evolution. And under open access, we have the rise of preprints. So what Jo is saying is that there is a need for increased education and awareness amongst higher education stakeholders, especially those who are working directly with early career researchers in universities. So we are looking at directors of postgraduate studies, or deputy vice chancellors of academic, to look at when a student is graduating, would they consider preprints as one of the publication outputs? Because it is the beginning. You know, when citation is calculated or downloads are calculated on a paper, it starts from the preprint level. It's not when it is actually accepted. So if they do accept it, so the next step is for this early career researcher to look for journals that work with preprint repositories. It means it's a win-win for everyone. The visibility of your output, that is number one, the visibility of your output. You end up having a smart journal selection strategy, so that you end up mitigating predatory publishing. We acknowledge we have platforms where you can get these journals easily, like we have Director of Open Access Journals, African Journals Online. There are platforms like Think, Check, and Submit, which can guide you. But these are useless if you are under pressure to publish and the journal selection strategy is taking long vis-a-vis now when you are going to graduate. So if the institution acknowledges the evolution of academic publishing with these new technologies in open science like preprints, it becomes easy for researchers to have a smart journal selection strategy, and for the student or the early career researcher to just look for journals that are indexed in some of these platforms, but accept preprints as well. So it is a win-win at the end of the day. So the need for education and awareness is really important in accommodating it. And I do understand some of the concerns researchers have towards preprints, but like any new technology, there will always be concerns. But then it's also an issue of looking at it from an evolving perspective and a way of increasing research visibility under the sphere of open science. Yeah.
And there's always a concept of the argument that by sharing your work before it is published, there's a possibility of getting scooped. What would you say to that?
The thing is, immediately, I'm looking at Africa Archive, immediately they submit their work, they get a DOI. It is not possible to have your works because it's already shows the world that it's already owned by one person. The much you can do is cite it. It's not possible to scoop the data. It's not possible to scoop the results. It's already got a digital object identifier. So it's not possible at all. If anything, it's a benefit because when it's out there, you're getting reviews from not only necessarily your peers, but the peer review communities. They're going through your work. And that is what science is all about. It's all about sharing your knowledge, learning from what everybody else is seeing about your knowledge. So we should be open to criticism because you're already going through the criticism with the journal, okay, with the journal peer reviewers, and you'll be going through open peer review as well. And now there are open peer review communities that have come in to work with preprint repositories. So in order to have this, the reason why we are having all these communities coming in with preprint repositories is to win the trust of authors You see, and other, just the concern you've put in there, so my work will be scooped. Will it be good quality work? You're winning the trust of authors by having a peer review community, by working with peer review partners who will review your work. And at the same time, your work is also being reviewed by the journal that you've identified. And so it's a win-win for you. Your work is not going to be scooped up because it already has a DOI. Whether it is data, raw data, in whichever language, it is yours. Yeah, so nobody will take it. Yeah.
It sets some precedents. It actually puts in there that it is your work. And actually,
exactly.
There's a possibility of even being scooped if you don't share your work in advance. Later on, you want to publish, you realize someone else has published before you and you cannot publish again. So I think it works really, really well. So thank you for that. And I think as we promote open access, and there are always barriers to it. And so, for example, the article processing charge is really high to publish. And someone wants to publish open access, yes, but they do not have funding to publish. And so I want just also bringing on board Kennedy as well to just speak to that as well. So we can start with Kennedy. What are some of the opportunities to still be open at a lower cost? What are some of the options available to people from low-income countries? Kennedy.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so some of some of the opportunities that are out there involve. I think considering that open science is not just the publication itself, you could also deposit your data, for example, in sites such as Zenodo. So you also give it a DOI, and that data it can be cited as it is. So that's one of another aspect of it. Besides also preprints. So in addition to preprints, you could deposit your data there. Same case with a site called Figshare. You could put your figures there. And also, as another to mention, you can also link it to GitHub and assign a DOI to the code that you write. So it is not just the publication, but the code, maybe the figures generated, and the data you have. So you could all deposit them in a place where you could cite.
Thank you, Kennedy. Joy, and then Jo.
Okay. In terms of low cost in publishing, that brings to fore the business side of open science. So it means that we have to be realistic on what entails open science. I know we are from the global south, but we should not assume that the entire spectrum of open science is free. It costs money. And then the question we should be asking ourselves, and this is what Kennedy was saying, is that, and also Kibet is reinforcing, is where can we get low cost? What low cost options exist? And what I'm happy to note is that the World Bank is very close to closely working with some of the major publishers, global publishers, in identifying countries that have a low GDP to make sure that these publishers, the researchers who publish in these journals, have waivers or very low cost as compared to what the publisher would have actually given them. So you see, the trends are changing. We cannot sit down and complain anymore because action is taking part. And of course, with what Kennedy had shared, there are publishers who have already set waivers for researchers in the global south, which you can either negotiate at low cost or free. But what I do know is that the World Bank is currently working with some of the leading open access publishers to either provide diamond access publishing, so meaning free to publish, free to access, or very low cost as compared to what the the publisher would have provided. So times are changing to make sure that open access, or rather open science, is equitable. We cannot truly ignore the business side of it. We truly cannot ignore that, because that is hubris. You know, it's hubris. So when we look at open science, we shouldn't be looking at free. We should look at it from the equitable perspective, or the equitable and low cost perspective of access to literature resources and research discovery resources. Yes. Kennedy.
Thank you. Jo?
Yes.
Okay. Kennedy, yes, you have your hand raised.
Oh, yeah,
you want to add
yeah.
something?
Yeah, just a small addition. So, yeah, I believe that in addition to the low cost, sometimes they waive everything. So I'd say that as an MSc student myself, after I've completed my research work and decided to publish, I found that maybe I didn't have the fee to publish the paper. So we had already gone through the Open Science, the hackathons and the seminars. So I was aware of that there are waivers out there, and I decided that the journal that I decided to publish in, they offered 50% waiver, and now I decided I have to maybe talk to them and see whether they could waive the whole cost. So that's also an option for us as African researchers. And actually, the whole cost was waived, and I published without any cost. The article processing charge was waived.
Thank you. Jo?
Yeah, thanks. So I agree with what was said, and I would like to add that the whole waiver business is, in my view, only further victimizing scholars, because it puts us in a position of having to beg for a discount because economies are so weak. There are estimates. And how long do you want to play that game? Of course, it's nice to get a discount, especially if you can't otherwise afford to publish. But the other question is, how much should it cost to publish in a journal? And what is an acceptable fee to publish? And there are several estimates, cost estimates, that none of which exceeds the amount of $300 to $500 per article of several pages. And what we're familiar with seeing as price tags is in the thousands. And that's the profit margins the publishers and the journals raise. And you can then ask the ethical questions: is it fair for them to charge so much in profit from the researchers, who will then have to cut that amount from the research budget, meaning they cannot hire their PhD student, they cannot hire that administrative staff to support their administrative work, or they have to cut a position in the library or whatever. And that's not only a problem across Africa, but on a global scale. So I would personally say that profit margins are way too high in the scholarly publishing industry, but that's another battle to fight. So what we can do in the meantime, as also Rina pointed out, there are several journals that have reasonable publishing fees, if any. There's many different open access formats besides the gold route, as also Joy pointed out. There's diamond, there's bronze, there's hybrid. I also shared the Wikipedia article on open access where you can read up yourselves. So there's not one way to finance the work that goes into publishing. And yes, positions need to be kind of not only subsidized, but paid for. There's human beings spending their lifetimes in providing that service. Not the whole lifetime, but you know what I mean? So there's human capital involved. And of course, people have to eat and somebody has to pay the cost. The question is, how much cost is it really that we need to cover? And who in the ecosystem is supposed to cover that cost? Or can we have a shared approach in that? But then again, this should not be the concern for the researchers, because they're here to do the work, meaning doing the research. And it's on other stakeholders like us, like who are more on the political agenda, also policy makers, and like who kind of make sure how much money, how much investment or national funding goes into research, and how much of that should go towards publishing, and what type of publishing. Is preprint publishing part of that, or it's seen as part, or just something that you can do if you have extra time? But in our view, data archiving and preprint publishing is now becoming an established part in the route to publish, and for science communication, because it provides immediate access and knowledge gain through research. And yes, there's also quality assurance involved. So yeah, there's many aspects to consider. And I think also Joy and also many others here, it's our job to make it as easy as possible for the researchers to make an informed decision on where and what to publish and how.
There's the need to ease the adoption of some of these. They are beneficial, it's well established. And I think the responsibilities of our responsibilities to ensure that now we can ease that process of adopting some of these practices. I can see time is really almost running out, but I just wanted to cover one more aspect. Impact factors is always an issue, and there's always this quotation that says, when a measure good hat, when a measure becomes a target, then it ceases to be a good measure. Is impact factor something that's still useful, and should we still be chasing after it? Joy?
That third side is obvious. Impact factor, we understand why it came, originally why it came. It was used mostly by librarians, okay? Mm-hmm. Then, and why it was used by librarians was they needed to see how journals were performing before they could subscribe to them. And this was when they were doing, they were getting journals, you know, when journals were not yet even digitized as well. We were just getting hard copies. And something that was originally noble was taken up by academic publishers, and it became part of marketing. And if you look at any journal, it's from a marketing, that is the first thing they'll see, that we have an impact factor of X, Y, and Z. Now, for somebody who's not familiar with the dynamics of impact factor, and it's most researchers, it can be very confusing, and it can be misguided and misconstrued and used as part of policy within universities when it comes to what do you call it? When you're promotions or getting grants. And I'm glad that is ending, because the original idea behind impact factor was to monitor the performance of journals in their specific research areas. And it is not, and the fact that it has been marketed as a form, as a requirement for promotions or a requirement for grants, breaks the purpose of what its original work was. And because of that, if you're not familiar with how it works, you're left in a situation whereby you're struggling to publish in certain high impact factor journals, okay, or rather impact factor journals. And it can be really frustrating for early career researchers. For mature researchers, there's a term in academic publishing called stacking. So you find yourself working with particular authors so that you can publish in journals in certain with certain impact factors. And here's the thing. The mere fact you publish in a journal of a certain impact factor doesn't mean that your research has impact, you see. If you're not talking about societal impact. So this is where people tend to mix the things with when it comes to impact factor in journals. It doesn't mean that your research has societal impact. It is just the performance of the journal. And what is happening is that universities in the global north are slowly weeding away from impact factor because they're seeing the discrepancies that come with it, and how it would benefit certain research areas, especially if you're in the health sciences. It would be so easy to rely on impact factor. If you're in social sciences, physical sciences, arts and humanities, it's, you know, it takes forever for one journal in arts and humanities to get even 0.004. it takes quite a long time as compared to a journal in health sciences. So the rise of the DORA declaration, which has made it clear that you need to look at other ways to measure the performance of a researcher and research output, is being adopted by most universities. And it's something that needs to be adopted in most African universities, because it was an easy sell, not necessarily African universities, but universities in the global South. It was an easy sell for researchers in the global South. And I understand the unfortunate dynamic, because we are partnering with researchers in the global North. Where is the funding coming from? The global North. The global North will dictate where you need to publish. The funder will dictate where you need to publish. And they say you need to publish in X type of journals. If you look at the factors, they're high impact. They're journals with high impact factors. And if you don't publish in a journal in a certain impact factor, it's not considered as good quality. So that confusion has to stop, because when you're looking at impact factor, it is looking at the performance of the journal in that research area. So you could have journals in AIDS and you're looking at the impact factor of immunology or virology. So it's the impact factor of the journals in virology focusing on AIDS. So it's not the impact of that research to society. So that is number one. So that education needs to be done to make people understand the difference. And also the other thing is looking at other ways to measure the performance of the researcher. So the DORA declaration, it makes you look at various aspects of the performance of a researcher, the impact of the research, and that is what is used to measure the overall impact of this researcher in society, in the institution. And I'm happy to say that a number of universities in the global North are adopting this. And if that happens, it means it will be easier for researchers or universities in the global South to adopt it, because unfortunately, through internationalization, we are having quite a bit of, we are heavily relying on partnerships from the global North, but that also means we need to look inwards as researchers and increase our global South-South collaborations, whereby we influence some of these trends, like the use of impact factor and go in line with the DORA declaration, which would be helping in supporting the impact of the output coming out of our institutions, and having a better mechanism for promoting researchers within our institutions as well. Yeah.
Absolutely, that's really, really important. I think you've answered beautifully and covered most of the aspects, because there's need for just adoption of some of these other measures of impact, and not chasing after the impact factor. And for that to change, there would be need for one, just building awareness and educating the researchers and the institutions, and in the end, of course, also changing policies that were promoting such practices. Because if you look at promotions being pegged on the impact of the publications that you're sharing, then people would definitely be chasing after the impact factor, even if they don't want to. So if there's always a bit of a dilemma, I may be really interested in promoting open science. I know it's actually really good, but I also care about my career. If I want to progress in my career, I would really want to chase after impact. And so there's that a bit of a dilemma, and that really requires a change of the policies that are already in place. I'm a bit torn, the conversation. I'm quite enjoying the conversation and the kind of feedback we're receiving from this. Thank you so much. There are a few, I think it's not much of questions, but there are comments that I think raised. The cost also depends on how selective the journal wants to be, and I don't think journals should be that selective. And I think not just the cost of publishing, but also even the impact. So most of the journals would be highly selective because they want to increase the impact of their impact factors. So there are plenty of cases where editors, where journal editors' decisions were not fair, so they're not making fair decisions. As they chase, they want to increase the cost or just also increase the impact of their work. Edna also raises concern. So she shared a link to GitHub, and I think not GitHub, Twitter. So where individuals from Africa are required to have their papers reviewed by English speakers, even though the paper is written very well, doesn't it mean they will be even more costly? It will be even more costly for one to get an English speaker to proofread your work. Those are some of the barriers that actually are there that reduces the feasibility or even the publication of African research. So I don't know, as we also just tend towards making our final remarks, so I would give Jo, as you had your hand raised, so you can also just speak to some of this question. Can we push for another, let's do another 10 minutes just to answer some of these questions. So Mike also asked the question, wondering how we can balance between open access and data privacy. How much can we share to make data open access? So Jo, also as you just, and as you raised the concern that you had, you raised your hand, just also speak to those questions that have been raised.
Yeah, thank you very much. So starting with the last question, last but not least. So in terms of sensitive data, also private data, I just want to highlight that open science, open access, open data doesn't mean that everything has to be openly put on the table. It always means as open as feasible, as closed as necessary. That should be basically the tagline, always mentioned along the term open science or open access. It does not mean that everything should be put on the table, because as researchers, we're dealing a lot with sensitive data that not only concerns data that can identify individual human beings, but also many of us work in ecology or biology, and we deal with endangered species. And if we share their geolocations openly, we make them accessible also to poachers, and that's then counterproductive. There's many other examples where data should not obviously be shared openly. And also we want to ensure a certain level of quality. So data, that's basically data processing. We don't want to share raw data necessarily. In some cases, yes, it's necessary. But the goal is to have the workflow and the process in the research process documented in such a way that the raw data can always be traced back. And in many cases, again, in geology and biology, the raw data was often not accessible anymore because of decay and natural processes happening. But at least it should be possible to trace back to how the researchers came to their conclusion and what decision-making points were taken into account, basically. And this is what open science is trying to achieve, is accountability, transparency in the process. But transparency does not mean it has to be publicly available necessarily, only as much as is feasible. And that cannot be generalized on a regional level or on a discipline level. It needs to be assessed on a project level, on an experimental level even. So each data point needs to be assessed for its feasibility of being shared in the open, like publicly on the internet. But what needs to happen is, and that's the actual aspect of open science, is that whoever other researcher inquires to see the workflow and understands how the results came into existence, basically, or how the conclusions were drawn, the originator of the data and the results is able to present that and point the other researcher towards the processes. And this is how we came to these results. In many cases, that other researcher is ourselves. And if you think about your own research from your bachelor, master, or PhD thesis, how difficult it is to recap your own work unless you document it well. And this is all we're trying to achieve with open science, and the whole approach of, including assessment, including data archiving, data documentation, and also then publishing, to make these results available to a wider public and the general public, meaning to policymakers, journalists, industrial stakeholders, and not to keep it locked away in the ivory towers around the world. Which brings me to the aspect of impact, and I just want to kind of underline what was earlier said. When we talk about impact, like I tend to ask also early career researchers, PhD students in their first, second, or third year of in their thesis and their dissertation, like, why did you become a researcher? What made you to choose this career path? Was certainly not easy to pursue. And often they have very noble goals in their minds, like combating a disease or making the world a better place and doing their part in achieving that. But then along the way, with the pressure in the publishing system, they lose the sight of these goals. And then it's only about impact factor and where to publish. But isn't it more important what we publish, and to publish in a way that doesn't cripple our research capacity at the department, at the institutional level, and also our own research budget as postdocs and PIs. And there's where we come back to alternative publishing routes or complementary publishing routes, and making an informed and wise decision where to publish, not to cripple ourselves, or not to feed a system that's counterproductive to the essence of why we do research in the first place. And just one last aspect, like with, I also hear and see that often, that especially African scholars are being asked to get a native English speaker, but aren't Kenyans native English speakers? Like, colonialism is, what is it, like 60 years ago since independence, or almost, and I think Kenyans as a nation and a population have mastered to claim the originally colonist and oppressors language for their own benefit as a trading language now, and also to turn it towards their own benefit to be able to communicate on a global level. And basically owning the language that was previously the oppressor's language. And I tend to say we have US American English, we have British English, there's Australian English, there's New Zealand Kiwi English, which is always referring to white colonists, basically, in all of these examples. How about Kenyan English? Why can't Kenyans have their own English with a Kenyan twist to it and make that a language? As much as Kiswahili is also a national language, but English continues to be, despite what's written in the not so new anymore Constitution, is still a trading and business language in the country, as much as I've seen. So I would say, I read the Twitter that was shared by Edna, and I think that's a great example for a pushback. Like, look, guys, I mean, we are native speakers. And what do you want from us? I think it takes a bold move to step up and basically, I mean, the demand to ask for a native speaker in many cases is ignorance or not knowing better. In some cases, it's pure racism, and we need to speak up against that. And to put that on Twitter is one way to do that. I mean, there's also opinions on Twitter which has pushback also likes of CNN and BBC. And other examples. So I mean, it's a struggle in some ways, but there's also not so well. There's many steps we can take, utilizing also principles of open science and open access to make our voices heard as ecosystem service providers for the region. And yeah, and I think we're making progress along the way, no matter what.
Yeah, and I think that's why we are seeing now the justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion being a really big thing, because some of those things, some of those statements, or some of those requirements actually just increasing the exclusion of this group of people. Joy, as you also address some of those issues, as you also make your final statement.
No, my final statement is very simple. We should not work in silos. We need to work together. If we politicize open science and make it regional based, in this continent, we stand a chance to lose an opportunity that has been set in front of us that can help us increase our visibility. We stand a chance to lose an opportunity that can help us be as competitive as researchers in the global north. And we stand a chance to lose an opportunity where we are not able to support our higher education sector, and then we'll have cyclic conversations of why we are not producing good quality research and why we are not visible. This is the best time for us to work together, regardless of the region, regardless of our interests, whether it's librarians, we need to work with the librarians, whether it is the library consortia, library networks, whether it's the research councils and the research council networks, whether it's the university commissions and the umbrella bodies that represent the universities. This is extremely important because it's the one opportunity where we need to show that, number one, we are united in supporting the increase of our output and the visibility of our output. And at the same time, we need to be extremely pragmatic about open science. We should not look at this strictly from the funding perspective. We need to look at it from the sustainable perspective. That will be our downfall. If we really do not look at it from a sustainable perspective, that will be our downfall. And here's a reality about being in the global south, and particularly in Africa. They want to know, okay, this program, which is on open science and open access, is it going to heavily rely on funding? We need to look at outside the box. How can it survive without funding? Okay? Such that whatever open science initiatives that we create are self-sustainable. Otherwise, this will just be another buzzword, as I had started earlier on. It will just be seen as another buzzword as the social development goals, just simply because it's easy access to get funding. We need to look at open science from a business perspective. We need to look at open science from a sustainable perspective, because it is a business. And what we're trying to say is that it needs to be equitable and low cost. If we don't look at it from those perspectives, we are in trouble. We are in trouble. And it is a huge opportunity for us as African researchers or African higher education stakeholders to help in increasing our visibility and output, and supporting early career researchers with access to resources, whether it's literature resources, data analytical resources, or research analytical resources that they can use to improve their research output.
Thank you. That's well captured. Having a look at open science from a business and sustainability perspective really it really works really well. If you can be able to have a look at it from those perspectives, sustainability, business, and just ensuring that one, we are not going to be working on a silo. This is something that is a global movement. Can we be part of this global movement? Take advantage of what's going on in the global south and bring it to the global north, take advantage of the funding opportunities that are available, but use those funding opportunities to more or less kickstart the process and work our way towards that sustainability. Really, that would work really well. Thank you so much. Well said. Kennedy, any final statements?
Yeah, I would say that open science is a community effort, and we have to recruit as many researchers as possible, especially for us Africans. And once we keep the conversation going, we can we'll join others in the global north, and our research will be out there and it will be more visible, especially in the publishing sector.
Thank you, Kennedy. And you've really put it well. Keep the conversation going. That's really important. I think that's also my message as we end today's session on open science. We need to keep this conversation going. We need to have this conversation, have that honest and candid conversation, one with each other, with our supervisors, with our administrators, with our governments, with our librarians. Have this conversation with all the stakeholders stakeholders that are involved. And when we have this conversation, we can be able to, one, ensure there's always awareness and create pathways towards the adoption of these practices. And really, I think this series of events and the symposium, going to the workshops, and also in the end, going to the conference that we will host at the end of all these are all aimed at that one thing, promoting open science within bioinformatics, but not just within bioinformatics community. It's promoting open science in these different communities. So we have that open science, introduction to open science through the symposium, research data management coming up tomorrow, project planning, reproducibility, and contribution to projects. And as we use this model, our interest is to actually create awareness. After creating awareness, equip each other with these practices, the tool that you would require for practicing such. And we'll have also, Joy will be taking us through our workshop also with our team much later on. And just in the end, having that within the conference, having the conversation, showcasing some of the different groups and people who are doing amazing work in one, really putting into practice this practices in their research, in their work, and so forth. So Joy, thank you so much for really the great presentation and the great conversation that we've had, Jo, as well. We've really quite responded really well, and we've really engaged really well, and the participants also just for listening in, sharing resources, sharing links, contributing to the conversation in different forms. Kennedy for the great presentation on open science in Kenya, where we are, and just putting into a research perspective, where really from a research perspective where we are, and Joy getting to also take us forward, where this was maybe 1 or 2 years ago, what is now currently going on, what are some of the policy initiatives that are ongoing, how can we contribute to the conversation, and I think that take-home message of continuing the conversation, speaking to all the stakeholders, would really help us drive this initiative forward and ensure that open science works for us, it makes sense for us, benefits us as a community of researchers and scientists. So thank you all. A round of applause for our speakers and panel participants. So I want to hand this over to Pauline. I think we may want to have a quick photo session if you'd like. I think that would really be nice. So Pauline, after you. Okay, Mike, understand.
Yes, hi everyone. So maybe just quickly, as we conclude, we can take a group photo. I'd like us to turn on our cameras. We're almost there. Give it a bit of some minutes. Just a little bit more. Okay. Yeah, now I'm taking a screenshot. The first page. The last page. Thank you guys for cooperating. Back to you, Khalid. I will
Awesome.
now stop the recording as well.